The state plans to execute 7 inmates in 11 days.
It's been a 25-year nightmare for the victims. It's time for that justice to be carried out.
The state's effort to execute a number of death row inmates hits a major legal snag.
The first 2 of the unprecedented executions have been blocked by the Arkansas Supreme Court.
What about their victims?
It's a roller coaster ride. They need to set something and leave it.
And up to the minute, we are monitoring breaking news as the state of Arkansas and the entire country wait to see if Arkansas will carry out a lethal injection tonight for the first time in 12 years. Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight at 10 o'clock, everyone. I'm Bob Clausen.
And I'm Ashley Katz, live at the Cummins unit tonight, where here we are in the 10 o'clock hour. A lot has progressed, yet we are still in a holding pattern. Both inmates scheduled to be executed, as it appears at the moment, will spend another night on death row. We know the state was hopeful earlier in the day that both men and their sentences would be carried out. But Bruce Ward, we have learned late tonight, will not be executed. He was the first inmate set to die at 7 o'clock. And now the only hurdle standing in the way is for Don Davis and a ruling from the Supreme Court of the United States. The ADC officials here behind me, they are waiting, along with reporters from all over the state and the country tonight. If, in fact, that ruling does come down, we have a 2-hour window, now less than 2-hour window, to execute Don Davis. And as we've been watching the courts today, so has our Marcy Manley. She's been following all of the legal proceedings today. Marcy, where do we stand at this hour?
Well, we've seen a number of updates happening throughout the day, and they are continuing to come in. Right now, we are waiting for the decision from Justice Samuel Alito. He's the Supreme Court justice that handles filings from the 8th Circuit. The Attorney General has requested that the Supreme Court vacate the Arkansas Supreme Court stay of execution for Don Davis. That stay of execution for Davis came down late this afternoon, and it's the only thing standing between him and the death chamber at this point.
Behind us, there's not a whole lot of information. Wait, hang on one sec. I'm being handed a phone here. Supreme Court of the United States maintains Davis's stay. It maintains
means
Davis's
no execution right now.
No execution.
As of April 17th.
Yeah.
You know, this was the day that the state set back in February for 2 men to be executed. It was down to 1 man who still had the possibility of being put to death tonight, and right now we're learning, at least according to the Supreme Court, who has the highest authority in the land, that this will not go on as planned tonight here at Cummins. In the past hour, the Arkansas Supreme Court paving the way for one of tonight's executions. Liddell Lee's execution is set to happen in about 2 hours. For now, Stacy Johnson's execution is still on hold. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ashley Katz.
Yeah, Bob Clausen and Ashley, just like Tuesday night, we're coming to you live from the Cummins unit here. This is home, of course, to Arkansas's death chamber. That's where the similarities basically end, because unlike Tuesday night, there are 2 men in cells adjacent to the death chamber, as you mentioned, Stacy Johnson and Liddell Lee. So at this point forward, it looks, as you mentioned, too, that we are on track for an execution at 7 o'clock. But then again, throughout the last day and perhaps throughout the evening, we will see a flurry of perhaps last-minute filings that could hold things up. We've got team coverage for you tonight, trying to bring all of this together. We are live with insight from Marcy Manley in Little Rock. We are live here on Cummins Prison with the very latest on what will be developing throughout the evening. We are also live in Washington, D.C. Drew Petchmo keeping an eye on the United States Supreme Court and anything that should happen up there. But first, we want to bring in Marcy Manley. And Marcy, we talked about some last-minute maneuvering, some last-minute decisions. Where does that bring us right now and into the evening?
Bob, at this point, Liddell Lee is facing execution tonight, while Johnson's death has been delayed by the Arkansas Supreme Court. Late this afternoon, the Arkansas justices eliminated another legal hurdle the state had faced by lifting an injunction that barred ADC from using one of those execution drugs. The drug company claimed the Department of Correction duped a sales rep into selling the drug without disclosing it would be used for an execution. A judge granted the injunction, which would have blocked all Arkansas executions, but the Supreme Court lifted that. Death row inmate Stacy Johnson has been issued a stay of execution. Just moments ago, the Supreme Court actually said that it would not reconsider that and leave it in place until he has had a chance to have a hearing on DNA testing. At this point, Liddell Lee does not have anything blocking his execution. We've been updating those dockets to see if there are any changes, because Lee does currently have several cases pending in state and federal courts that remain unresolved, with 2 hours until that first scheduled execution. Based on our experiences from Monday, there's plenty of time for all of this to change. Now, KARK's Drew Petrimo is following developments in the nation's capital. Drew, what implications could the U.S. Supreme Court have for these death row inmates?
Well, you talked about there still being time for things to change, and that's certainly the case here in Washington. One of the issues on the table of the Supreme Court involves a petition from inmates. They are asking the justices to reconsider a stay that was first put in place by a federal judge in Arkansas. That stay was eventually lifted by the Court of Appeals, but the inmates are asking the Supreme Court to consider reinstituting that stay. We're also waiting to hear about a next move possibly from the drug supplier. You just talked about it. The drug supplier says its drugs that are going to be used in the lethal injection protocol were acquired improperly. Their case so far was lifted by the state Supreme Court. Question now, will they appeal that to the U.S. Supreme Court? That's something we will be waiting and watching for leading up to this scheduled execution. That's the latest here live in Washington, D.C. I'm Drew Petrimo. Bob, back to you.
All right, Drew, thanks a lot. Still things are, I guess you could say, early on as far as this goes. Stephanie Sharp joining me now. We've been talking about what may or may not happen involving the condemned men tonight. But up front, we've got to talk about why we're here, and that's the loss of life. 2 women were put to death or were murdered brutally in fashion, which is why the guys are here. You got to talk about the families. They've been waiting for justice for over 20 years now.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, a lot of our attention is drawn to the suspects, but of course we want to talk about the victim and the victim's families and all of this. Liddell Lee killed 26-year-old Deborah Reese in her Jacksonville home in 1993, and prosecutors say Lee hit her 36 times with a tire thumper. Reese's son was only 6 years old at the time. He says his loss still affects him every day.
He is the embodiment of the evil that should never have to exist in this world.
Prosecutors say Lee committed violent crimes against 5 women. His victims' ages range from 17 to 70. And as for Stacy Johnson, he's convicted of violently killing Carol Heath in 1993 in DeQueen. He beat, strangled, and slit Heath's throat while 2 children hid in the home. After the long legal battle, the victim's family just wants a resolution.
This has been the hardest thing I've ever had to go through my whole entire life.
We all want an end.
His son that you saw right there has grown up without a mother. The family just wants Johnson to admit to his crimes.
Steph, the families are given the opportunity to come down here and witness executions. Do you know if they'll be in attendance tonight?
Yeah, we were told by the Department of Corrections that both families have planned to come here tonight, and they will be here tonight regardless of what executions go through.
It seems like this is a big piece of closure, but it seems after 20 years, a lot of them, some of them think that maybe this day never was going to come, but it appears, at least for one of them, it may happen.
It does appear that way. And of course, you know, these victim families, they've been waiting for this for a long time, and it's been a hard, couple decades for them.
But we have seen from Tuesday, things can change. Stephanie Sharp, thanks very much. One thing, though, also a lot of taxpayers say is, how much is this costing us? How much does it cost to actually keep people on death row leading up to these executions that basically take decades to get to? Arkansas Department of Correction estimated it costs about $67 a day to house a death row inmate. Breaking that down, the cost for the 8 inmates whose executions are or were set for this month, the most pricey prisoner in that group is Bruce Ward, who was here Tuesday, who did not get executed. The state has spent more than $600,000 keeping him on death row since he was first placed here in 1990. Looking at the other inmates, the state has spent more than $500,000 to house Stacy Johnson, who is here this evening. The parole board recommended clemency for Jason McGee, his stay costing the state $450,000. As of today, their time behind bars comes in $4.2 million price tag. That, of course, to taxpayers. But, when it comes to the cost, Ashley, the victims' families will say the cost is time. They lost loved ones so many years ago, and they say that these inmates have been able to basically keep breathing while their loved ones had all the time stolen from them the last 20 years. So we wait and see. We know that things could change at any minute, and that's, of course, why we've got Marcy Manley so steadfast standing by to watch any late-breaking developments.
All right, and we also have a crew inside. Bob, have you heard from them about a last meal for the inmates, or at least for Liddell Lee at this point?
Haven't heard anything from them. They just got in there. They check in, and they've got to make sure they've got everything in place so they can keep us up to date on what's happening inside and then translate that to us. But we haven't heard anything about a last meal just yet.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Bob. And we do want to wrap this up for you. The two men originally scheduled to be executed tonight, you see them here, Liddell Lee and Stacy Johnson. Johnson murdered Carol Heath at her home in DeQueen in April of 1992. Lee was convicted in 1993 of murdering his neighbor, Donna Reese. That happened in Jacksonville. Liddell Lee's execution will still go on as planned tonight. You heard Marcy explain there is nothing standing in the way of his execution. However, Stacy Johnson's is on hold. And tonight after KARK 4 News at 6, we will continue our coverage online as Arkansas moves forward with Lee's execution. You can watch our live reports. We'll also have analysis for you on ArkansasMatters.com.
Meantime, I want to bring in Marcy Manley, who's been monitoring the situation very closely. Latest developments with the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals.
Okay, so obviously we got that stay from the 8th Circuit on its own motion, but really I want to quickly go to Drew Petramo. I think we have some developments out of D.C. with the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court decision. And Drew, I have in hand what looks like a denial for stay of execution of sentences of death from the Supreme Court of the United States. Can you have been able to read through any of this, and do you have any additional information at this point?
Hey, Marcy. Yeah, I'm actually just looking on my phone right now. It came through for me as well. And, you know, from what I can read, just going over it, all I see is denied, denied, going through more denied, denied. I mean.
And good evening, everyone. This just into Fox 16 and KARK. Breaking news. The Supreme Court of the United States has just issued a statement saying it has denied all of condemned inmates Liddell Lee's motions for executions. Simply put, Liddell Lee will be executed tonight.
According to the state's lethal injection procedure, the executioner will enter the chamber prior to the inmate's scheduled time of execution. They will inspect what's called the injection drug box, ensuring all chemicals are accounted for. The gurney will be positioned so the deputy director and executioner can directly see the inmate's face and IV infusion site. At that point, the condemned inmate will be brought in and strapped down. The IV team, who are licensed and have at least 2 years' experience, will then insert 2 IV bags containing normal saline. When the flow is secure and safe, the warden will give the green light. The IV team will first administer 2 syringes containing 250 milligrams of midazolam, a sedative that is supposed to make the inmate unconscious. If the inmate is not unconscious, backup syringes of midazolam and saline will be given in a secondary infusion site. There will then be a 5-minute waiting period, at which point the deputy director will confirm the inmate is in fact unconscious. Once that is determined, the second drug will be administered. 2 syringes containing 50 milligrams of vecuronium bromide, a paralytic. Then comes the third and final drug, 2 syringes of 120 milliequivalents of potassium chloride will begin to flow, ultimately causing the inmate's heart to stop.
That was about 30 minutes ago or so, so I would assume just about any minute
and guys,
we should be hearing something.
Curious. It's official. Okay. It's official. Liddell Lee just became Arkansas's first lethal injection in more than a decade. That is the tweet from Jesse Tenure. It has happened. It is done. It is final.
Time of death, 11:56.
It's over.
Before midnight.
So Liddell Lee is has died from lethal injection tonight. We should be getting a press conference very, very soon, and that is when some action will start happening out here, and we'll be able to get more information in terms of what went on inside.
But given the timing of things, you know, Kevin, back to the timing issue, it seems like the timing was right on as far as these things go historically.
The protesters, from what I understand, at the governor's mansion, lots of tears,
lots of tears. Obviously, they did not want to see this happen. You do have people who are opposed to the death penalty. They say, you know, one wrong doesn't make a right, or two wrongs, excuse me, doesn't make a right. And that's what we're getting too on social media. We're getting a lot of people who are just very upset that this is actually happening tonight.
Well, then there's a lot of people too that are very upset that it has taken this long.
Now, covering every county, this is your statewide newscast. Arkansas Today in high definition.
I'm so sorry. I wish I could take it back, but I can't.
He didn't want it straightened out. He wanted the life he had.
Good Monday afternoon. I am Aaron Nolan. The state is moving forward with plans to execute these two death row inmates. Jack Jones and Marcel Williams are scheduled to die by lethal injection beginning at 7 o'clock tonight. We do have team coverage this afternoon. Drew Petromo is live in Washington, D.C., where the U.S. Supreme Court could decide a case which could impact future executions. Victoria Price is at the Cummins unit in Lincoln County. But first, let's go to Marcy Manley, who's been following the legal issues of all of these executions. Marcy, we started Monday. Things are continuing to develop. In fact, just moments ago, there has actually been a ruling on the case of Jack Jones.
Yeah, one of the several rulings, rather, just like in those previous cases there. And there are currently cases pending in state and federal courts regarding Williams and Jones. The 8th Circuit just handing down this decision denying his stay of execution. We're tracking a total of 9 cases at this point.
Hey, Aaron, this case involves James Mcwilliams Jr. He was charged in 1984 with the rape, robbery, and murder of a convenience store clerk in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. 2 years later, he was given the death penalty in court, but like many cases in Arkansas, this case has been bogged down in the courts ever since, and it's all over this issue of whether or not he was entitled to an independent mental health expert at trial. His lawyers say he was, and therefore he is entitled to be resentenced. Lawyers for the state, meanwhile, say that what they say was an independent expert that provided testimony to both sides in the case is sufficient to meet the requirements of the law. Now, this is a key case for Arkansas because the state Supreme Court stayed the executions both of Don Davis and Bruce Ward actually 1 week ago today while this case plays its way through the courts. Take a listen. We heard from both sides of the case outside the courtroom.
You don't want to have an expert sit down and analyze your case for you and then go across the street and talk to the prosecutor.
Assistance doesn't necessarily mean it's on a side. It means it's helping a lawyer understand what the issues are in the case, and an independent expert can do that.
Now, both sides got about 30 minutes to argue in front of justices. They were both peppered with questions from those justices. A decision not expected until later this summer, actually at some point between now and the June recess. But again, it could have big implications for Arkansas if the court sides with the state of Alabama. That could pave the way for the executions to be carried out of both Don Davis and Bruce Ward. For now, that's the latest here live in Washington, D.C. I'm Drew Petromo. Aaron, back to you.
As we are now just 1 minute away from the top of the hour, and again, we have no way of knowing exactly what is going on behind us. We can make assumptions based on previous executions, such as Liddell Lee's and some of the other executions that were scheduled to take place last week, but were called off at the last minute. So we wait and see. Donna, it's official. Jack Jones, a condemned inmate who's been on death row for more than 20 years, has been executed. This according to Jesse Tenor, who just sent out a tweet saying, quote, Jack Jones, who raped and murdered a bald knob mom and beat her daughter nearly to death, has been executed. The time of death, 7:20. 7:20. It is official. Jack Jones has become the second death row inmate in the state of Arkansas to be executed since 2005. So that is official. And now we are roughly 35 minutes, 40 minutes away from the next scheduled execution of Marcel Williams. I know you're busy, but it's official, and it only took 14 minutes. Describe the process from your vantage point being inside the media room.
Sure. So the phone rang. Solomon Graves was standing by. He's the public information officer for the Arkansas Department of Correction. He announced that at 7:06 they started the process. to execute Jack Jones, and the coroner ruled his death at 7:20 p.m. What's interesting is there were last words. It was too lengthy. So that is going to be provided to the media here shortly. We don't know exactly when. We know that the Arkansas Department of Correction Director is drafting that right now, and that's going to be forwarded to the PIO and then ultimately forwarded to us. We do know that Jack Jones' family's victim is here, and they're going to be providing a statement to the media.
Working the Attorney General's office that a temporary stay has been issued for Marcel Williams. This now we're getting word 3 minutes after this execution was set to begin. This is coming from Judge Christine Baker.
She actually denied the preliminary injunction to Marcel Williams earlier this week. That was on Friday. She issued that ruling, and that was appealed to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, which was also upheld all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
A little more than 2 hours after his scheduled execution was to take place, we find out that at 10:33, Marcel Williams has been pronounced dead. This is the first time the country has seen a double execution take place in about 17 years. So there you go. Marcel Williams and Jack Jones both put to death tonight by the state of Arkansas for capital murder.
Marcel Williams initially scheduled to die at 8:15, and then there was a stay of execution, which held up things for a while. We've been waiting, and you know, Bob, we have learned from the execution with Liddell Lee on Thursday that there is a point in time in which you get absolutely no information. Once that stay was lifted, we have been waiting and waiting and waiting, and just moments before we decided to do our Facebook Live, we got the word that the phone in the media room rang. The PR person for the Arkansas Department of Correction, Solomon Graves, answered the phone and rendered this information to the media.
In just a minute. There's definitely a different mood in the air right now. A little more tension and a little less tension in different ways. I would like to thank the governor and his office and everyone that works with him and for him.
Bob and Donna, as you can see here, Jessie Tenura has finally made her way out after witnessing, one of the executions. Marcel Williams. First of all, how are you doing?
Honestly, fine. I mean, it was very methodical. It was, as far as we could tell, you know, the inmate wasn't having any sort of trouble throughout it, any sort of problems. And so for all of us, I mean, it was, once it did happen, once it started, it was honestly, you know, like I keep saying, we just kept doing our role, and it was not horrible to watch, to be there.
And tonight at 10, we are following the latest breaking developments as we await word on the final of 4 scheduled executions in Arkansas. Right now, we're in limbo as we wait for a decision from the United States Supreme Court. Good evening, and thanks for choosing KARK4 News. I'm Ashley Ketz. Death row inmate Kenneth Williams was set to be put to death at 7 tonight, but that's on hold at the moment. He was to be sentenced to death by lethal injection 17 years ago, and his death warrant expires in about 2 hours from now. KARK4's Bob Clausen is anchoring our coverage live outside the Cummins unit in Lincoln County tonight. Bob?
Hello and good evening, Ashley. You know, you mentioned that we're in limbo. We're actually in a pattern that we're told where we are, which is a courtesy, almost a courtesy open-ended amount of time for the Supreme Court to review this. Ask anyone out here just exactly what that means, and they're going to tell you we're not really sure. Even seasoned folks who have watched many of these and watched the Supreme Court review many of these aren't exactly sure what's happening. They could have issued a stay until 10:30, until 11:30, but they didn't. It was just kind of a courtesy. We also understand the governor is going to be talking to the Attorney General's office, if they're not talking right now. Said they've been talking to them about 10 o'clock, so something may come from that conversation. Other than that, you're right. The best way to describe this is in limbo. We're really not sure what's happening, if there's going to be any kind of a stay this evening, if they're going to run this up until the death warrant expires at midnight, or if we're going to have a definitive fact that we will move forward with an execution. A lot of things are happening right now, and I think a lot of the watchers, Marcy Manley with her legal eyes, probably eager to see just exactly what it is that's specifically holding this up and what it is the Supreme Court is looking at. Marcy, are anything getting telegraphed to you as to what's happening?
Well, not really, Bob. What we have learned is that right now a lot of time is passing at this stage, and there are currently 3 things pending before the United States Supreme Court. And as Bob said, this is a courtesy at this point. There is no stay in place. There is no temporary injunction. But what we did to get right here is that there are only cases at the federal level. We do know that at the Supreme Court. Yesterday, the Arkansas Supreme Court denied 2 requests for a stay of execution. The court also denied 2 other motions for an emergency stay. Then the federal 8th Circuit Court of Appeals also denied all 3 of his requests for stay of execution. In these filings, he's alleged intellectual disability, physical impairments that could cause problems with the drug protocols, and juror misconduct.
Stephanie Sharp joining us now. You spent a lot of time with some folks, and to say that this has been emotionally raw for a lot of them is an understatement. A lot of them taking a very unique approach to dealing with this and also helping others deal with it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Bob. And of course, as we wait for all these legal challenges, we have to look back on what put Kenneth Mcwilliams on death row in the first place. And it's been nearly 2 decades since he was convicted of killing a college cheerleader. Dominique Nikki Hurd was just 19 years old, and she was a student at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff when she was killed. Her mom, Mcwilliams, remembers her only biological daughter as someone who was full of life. Nikki was studying to be a doctor at the University of Pine Bluff when she and a friend were kidnapped, robbed, and shot by Kenneth Mcwilliams. Her mother says she forgives Mcwilliams, but says she wonders if other tragedies could have been avoided if Kenneth Mcwilliams had been sentenced to death in the first place for killing her daughter.
Kind of felt like if they would have given him that at first, maybe could have saved some more lives.
Nikki's family is not here tonight, and they say they are ready to move forward also while remembering their daughter. Looking at another victim, not everyone wants to see Kenneth Mcwilliams put to death. The last person killed by Mcwilliams was Michael Greenwood, who died in a car crash Mcwilliams caused while fleeing from police in Missouri. Greenwood's daughter, Kayla, is now close friends with Mcwilliams' daughter, Jasmine, and just yesterday helped her and her daughter see Mcwilliams one last time. And here's what they had to say about the situation.
For me, I just put myself in her shoes, and it just feels like I would be able to see my dad, and I would be able to see my dad meet my children.
He said tomorrow, like, no matter what happens, he will at least be more at peace now, knowing that he was able to see me and my daughter, and as well as everything the Greenwood family has done for him.
I think we've got...
Yeah, just breaking news right now. Kenneth Mcwilliams has been executed.
Time of death, 11:05.
Just 4 minutes ago.
So Kenneth Mcwilliams now the 4th person to be put to death in the state of Arkansas in the last 7 days.
So there's been, Mitch just put out a tweet saying that you thought that something might have gone wrong. What were you seeing that led you to believe that?
Well, there was a lot of heavy chest pumping, a lot of heavy breathing, even after they turned off the microphones. You know, he gave his final statements. The last thing he said was in tongues, and then he said something else, and his voice began to trail off like he was falling asleep. And then, right after that, the chest started going up and down and up and down and up and down very rapidly at first, and it continued that way for... Let me look at my notes to make sure I got it. And what I wrote down was that this started at 10:55. The chest just started pumping rapidly. There was a coughing sound. His mouth was closed, but it was like his breathing was labored. And that actually went on from about 10:55 until 10:59. That's when I wrote, stopped breathing, wasn't noticeable anymore. So, you know, I've never witnessed an execution before, but if it's supposed to happen where the person is put to sleep the way we've always described it, and then, you know, they add the paralytic drug, that didn't happen after the midazolam, that very first drug. There was just a lot of heavy chest pumping and sounds coming out, and the microphone was turned off and we could still hear it.
What was the conscious test? How did that play out? Did it seem...
Well, even while he was still making these sounds, the attendant who had a microphone on, he rubbed across his eyes, and it seems like he opened the eyelids and rubbed across the eyes to do the whole consciousness test, but the heavy breathing continued for a while, even after that first consciousness test. Now, was he given another dose of the midazolam? I've always been told that that could potentially happen. There's no way of really knowing that because, Jesse, you've been in there before. You don't really see when the drugs are going through the tube and into the arm.
Right. One question, though, in Marcel Williams' case, we were able to kind of see the attendant with the headset kind of do a second round of consciousness checks that weren't as thorough. Did you see that?
He did do that, but that actually didn't happen until 11:02 was when I saw the consciousness test again. And